Michael Harrison recognized his own rare birthmark on the orphan's neck during a routine charity visit. And suddenly, the daughter he never knew he had was staring back at him with his first love's eyes. The silence in Michael Harrison's penthouse had become deafening since Sarah's death. 3 months had passed, yet her presence lingered in every corner, in the faint scent of her perfume that still clung to their closet, in the dog-eared books on her nightstand, in the half-finished fertility clinic paperwork tucked away in her desk drawer. Standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan apartment, Michael watched the city lights flicker like distant stars. His reflection stared back at him, tall, distinguished in his tailored suit, graying slightly at the temples, the very picture of success that masked a growing emptiness inside. At 45, he was at the peak of his career as CEO of Harrison Tech Solutions and completely alone. The gentle knock at his office door broke through his reverie. Harrison, Grace Thompson, his newly appointed head of corporate social responsibility, stood in the doorway. Her practical blazer and compassionate expression were a stark contrast to the sleek modernism of his office. The children's home in Brooklyn is expecting us at 2. Michael nodded, gathering his coat. This visit wasn't just another corporate philanthropy initiative. Sarah had spent their last months together talking about adoption, showing him profiles of children waiting for homes. "Life is too short to wait," she'd said, squeezing his hand between chemotherapy sessions. "These children need love now." The drive to Brooklyn was quiet, with Grace occasionally glancing at her tablet, reviewing the home's needs assessment. "They're doing remarkable work with limited resources," she commented, "especially with their older children program." The St. Mary's Home for Children stood like a weathered sentinel among modern buildings, its red brick facade telling stories of generations of children who have passed through its doors. Sister Margaret, a petite woman with keen eyes and silver hair, greeted them at the entrance. "Mar, Harrison, we're honored by your interest in our work," she said, leading them through corridors filled with children's artwork. The walls seemed to pulse with life, drawings of dreams and hopes pinned carefully in neat rows. As they toured the facility, Michael found himself drawn to the quiet moments. A teenage boy teaching a younger child to read, a girl carefully tending to plants in the small greenhouse, the sound of piano practice drifting from a recreation. It was nothing like the sterile institutions he'd imagined. "And this is our library," Sister Margaret announced, opening a door to reveal a cozy room lined with books. A girl of about 12 sat cross-legged in a window seat, completely absorbed in a thick volume. She looked up briefly, and something in her serious expression caught Michael's attention. "That's Emma," Sister Margaret said softly. "She's been with us for 8 months now. Quite the reader. Reminds me of a young librarian I once knew." Emma tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, revealing a small crescent-shaped birthmark on her neck. Michael's hand unconsciously went to the identical mark on his own neck, hidden beneath his collar. The gesture wasn't lost on Grace, who gave him a curious look. The rest of the tour passed in a blur of statistics and needs assessments, but Michael's thoughts kept returning to the girl in the library. There was something familiar about her features, something that stirred memories he couldn't quite grasp. Back in his office that evening, Michael found himself opening the drawer where he kept Sarah's things. Among the papers was a photo from their college days, him and Sarah at a party, and in the background, a woman with dark hair like Anna's, Julia Parker. The name came to him suddenly, along with memories of a brief relationship before he'd met Sarah, a summer romance that ended when Julia transferred to another university. His phone buzzed, Grace, sending the detailed proposal for St. Mary's funding. But attached was a personal note. "Mr. Harrison, I noticed your reaction to Emma today. If you're interested in learning more about our adoption program, I have some information that might be helpful." Michael stared at the message for a long time, his finger hovering over the reply button. Sarah's voice echoed in his mind. "Life is too short to wait." Finally, he typed, "Tell me more." That night, sleep eluded him. He stood at his window again, watching the city below, thinking about empty rooms and silent spaces, about birthmarks and familiar faces, about second chances and the strange ways life had of coming full circle. Tomorrow, he decided, he would begin the process, not just of funding ST Mary's, but of changing his life entirely. He didn't know then how much his world was about to shift, or that the crescent-shaped birthmark he'd glimpsed would lead him down a path he never expected. As he finally drifted off to sleep, the photo of Julia Parker lay on his desk, a ghost from the past about to collide with his future. The weeks that followed Michael's initial visit to St. Mary's took on a dreamlike quality. Between board meetings and quarterly reports, he found himself spending increasing amounts of time reviewing adoption paperwork, his desk now covered with a different kind of documentation than he was accustomed to handling. Grace had become an unexpected ally, efficiently managing both the corporate donation process and discreetly providing information about adoption procedures. One afternoon, she placed a thick folder on his desk, her expression carefully neutral. "Emma's file," she said simply. "Sister Margaret thought you might want to review it, given your interest in possibly adopting an older child." Michael waited until he was alone before opening it. The details of Emma's life before ST Mary's were sparse. Abandoned at a hospital in Connecticut, bounced between foster homes until landing at ST Mary's. But it was the medical history that made his hands tremble. Blood type AB negative, the same rare type as his own. And there, in black and white, her date of birth. Exactly 13 years after that summer with Julia, he found himself making more frequent visits to ST Mary's, ostensibly to oversee the implementation of new programs funded by Harrison Tech. Each time, he'd find a reason to pass by the library, where Emma could usually be found buried in a book. During one such visit, he finally gathered the courage to speak with her directly. "What are you reading?" he asked, approaching her window seat carefully, as one might approach a nervous cat. Emma looked up, her serious eyes assessing him. "The Secret Garden," she replied, showing him the worn copy. "It's about an orphan who finds a family, but it's not as cheesy as it sounds. Mary's actually kind of mean at first, which makes it more real. I remember reading that when I was about your age," Michael said, settling into a nearby chair. "I liked that it didn't sugarcoat things. Adults usually try to sugarcoat everything when they talk to kids here," Emma said, marking her place with a bookmark. "Especially about families and adoption. They act like getting adopted is like winning some kind of lottery." Her directness startled a laugh out of him. "And you don't think it is?" "I think," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "that real things are complicated. Like in good books, nothing's ever just happy or sad. It's usually both at the same time." The conversation stayed with Michael for days afterward. He found himself sharing it with Dr. Rachel Chun, the therapist he'd been seeing since Sarah's death. "She reminds me so much of Julia," he admitted during one session. "The way she thinks things through, her seriousness. And there's something else." He hesitated before revealing his suspicions about their possible connection. Dr. Chun leaned forward. "Michael, what are you really looking for? A daughter to adopt, or answers about your past? Can it be both?" he asked. But the question haunted him. Meanwhile, his relationship with Emma developed gradually through their conversations in the library. He learned that she excelled in science, but struggled with history. That she played chess, but hated checkers. That she kept a journal where she wrote stories about parallel universes, where things worked out differently for people. Grace observed these interactions with growing concern. One evening, after everyone else had left the office, she came to speak with him privately. "Mr. Harrison," she began, then softened her tone. "Michael, I need to ask something difficult. Is your interest in Emma purely about adoption? Or is there something else you're not telling me?" He considered deflecting, but found he couldn't. "I knew her mother," he said finally. "At least, I think I did. And the birthmark, the blood type. Grace, I think she might be my daughter." Grace sank into a chair. "If that's true, it complicates things legally. The adoption process." "I know," he interrupted. "But doesn't she deserve to know the truth? Don't I? Have you considered what this could do to her? She's already dealing with abandonment issues. Finding out her biological father has been..." "What? Testing the waters? That could be devastating." The criticism stung because it contained truth. He'd been so caught up in unraveling the mystery that he hadn't fully considered the impact on Emma. That night, unable to sleep, Michael found himself looking through old photos again. He found one from that summer with Julia, her smile bright, her dark hair catching the sun. He remembered her passion for literature, her dream of becoming a writer. He'd never known why she'd transferred so suddenly, why she'd cut off all contact. His phone lit up with a text from Grace. "Whatever you decide, she needs stability first. Build trust. The truth can wait until the foundation is solid." Michael placed Julia's photo back in the drawer, but not before noticing something he'd missed before. In the background, a book she was holding, The Secret Garden. The past and present were weaving together in ways he couldn't ignore, but Grace was right. Emma needed a father, not a detective. He would move forward with the adoption process openly and honestly, building the foundation for whatever truth might eventually emerge. As he finally drifted off to sleep, he thought about Emma's words about real things being complicated, about happiness and sadness existing simultaneously. She was wise beyond her years, his daughter, and he caught himself realizing he'd already begun thinking of her that way. The morning everything changed started like any other. Michael was reviewing adoption paperwork in his home office when his assistant called about an urgent matter at Harrison Tech. A potential security breach had the board, demanding an emergency meeting. As he rushed to gather his things, a small envelope slipped from the stack of adoption documents, landing face down on his hardwood floor. The return address froze him in place. Connecticut State Medical Center, dated 13 years ago. It was addressed to him at his old apartment, but he'd never seen it before. With trembling hands, he opened the yellowed envelope, and his world tilted on its axis. "Dear Mr. Harrison," the letter began. "This letter is to inform you that Julia Parker has listed you as the father of her unborn child." The rest of the words blurred as memories crashed over him. Julia's sudden transfer, her unanswered calls that he'd been too busy to return, her final message saying she needed to talk about something important. His phone buzzed insistently. The board was waiting, but the letter in his hands demanded immediate attention. He called Grace. "Cancel everything," he said, his voice raw. "I need you to meet me at St. Mary's." Now, the drive to Brooklyn was a blur. Grace was already waiting outside when he arrived, her expression shifting from concern to alarm as she saw his face. "I have proof," he said, thrusting the letter at her. "She tried to tell me. Julia tried to reach me about the pregnancy, but I was too wrapped up in my career to notice. The hospital sent this letter, but by then I'd moved." It was returned to sender. Grace scanned the letter, her professional composure cracking. "Where did you find this?" Mixed in with the adoption paperwork, someone must have found it during the background check. He ran a hand through his hair, disheveled from constant worried gestures. "I have to tell her, Grace. Today. I can't keep pretending." "Michael, wait." Grace grabbed his arm as he headed for the entrance. "Think this through. Emma's in school right now. This needs to be handled delicately." But fate had other plans. As they argued on the steps, a yellow school bus pulled up for an early dismissal day neither of them had known about. Emma descended the steps, freezing when she saw them. Her sharp eyes took in Michael's distressed state, the letter in Grace's hand, their guilty expressions. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice small but steady, the moment stretched like glass about to shatter. Michael looked at Grace, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Emma, we need to talk," he began, but she was already backing away, her gaze fixed on the letter. "That's about me, isn't it?" Her voice cracked. "I saw you looking at my file before. You've been watching me for weeks. What aren't you telling me?" Students streamed around them, creating a bubble of private drama in the midst of public space. Sister Margaret appeared in the doorway, sensing trouble. "Perhaps we should continue this inside," she suggested. But Emma shook her head. "No, tell me now. What's in that letter?" Michael knelt to her level, aware of curious eyes watching them. "I knew your mother, Emma, Julia Parker. She tried to tell me about you, but I never knew. I just found out." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by a storm of emotions. Shock, anger, betrayal. The book she was holding, another copy of The Secret Garden, fell from her hands. "You're my father?" The words came out as barely a whisper. "You've known this whole time?" All those conversations in the library. You were just what? Testing me? No, Emma. I suspected, but I wasn't sure until today. I wanted to get to know you first, to build trust. Trust. She laughed, a harsh sound that didn't belong in a child's throat. You've been lying to me since the day we met. Before anyone could react, she turned and ran, not into the building, but down the street, disappearing around the corner. Emma. Michael started after her, but Grace's hand on his shoulder stopped him. Let Sister Margaret handle this, she said. You've done enough damage for one day. The words hit him like physical blows, but he knew she was right. He watched helplessly as Sister Margaret efficiently organized a search, dispatching staff in different directions. She has places she goes when she's upset, Sister Margaret explained, her tone carefully neutral. We'll find her. But Mr. Harrison, I think it's best if you leave for now. Let us handle this. The drive back to Manhattan was torture. Every stoplight seemed to mock him with its red warning. His phone remained silent. No word from St. Mary's. No news about Emma. In his office, he pulled up everything he could find about Julia Parker. The trail went cold after Emma's birth. A death certificate from 8 years ago. Cancer, just like Sarah. His daughter had lost both mothers, and he hadn't been there for either. As night fell, Grace finally called. They found her, she said without preamble. She was at the public library on Eastern Parkway. She's safe, but she doesn't want to see you. Sister Margaret says she needs time to process this. And honestly, Michael, so do you. He ended the call and stood at his office window, watching the city lights blur through tears he couldn't hold back. In his pocket, the letter felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 13 years of unspoken truths, of missed chances, of a father's love waiting to be given. The next few days passed in a fog of guilt and regret. Michael threw himself into work, spending long hours at the office while desperately waiting for updates about Emma. Grace became his lifeline to St. Mary's, delivering daily reports with diplomatic care. She's attending classes, Grace informed him on the third day, but she stopped going to the library. Sister Margaret says she's been writing constantly in her journal instead. Michael nodded, his fingers absently tracing the crescent-shaped birthmark on his neck. Has she said anything about me? Grace's hesitation spoke volumes. She's asking questions about Julia. Sister Margaret gave her what information they have, but it's limited. Michael, I think it's time we brought in some professional help. That's how Dr. Rachel Chun became involved, not just as Michael's therapist, but as a bridge between father and daughter. Her first meeting with Emma was scheduled for the following week. Remember, Dr. Chun warned Michael during their session. Healing happens at its own pace. Emma's whole world has been upended. She's not just processing finding her father. She's dealing with feelings of abandonment, betrayal, and loss all over again. What if she never wants to see me again? The fear that had been haunting him finally found voice. Then you respect her choice, Dr. Chun replied firmly. But first, you need to ask yourself some hard questions. Are you ready to be her father? Not just legally, but emotionally? This isn't about making up for past mistakes anymore. It's about moving forward. The weekend crawled by. Michael found himself driving past St. Mary's, knowing he shouldn't go in but unable to stay completely away. During one such drive, he spotted Emma in the small garden behind the building, sitting alone on a bench. She looked up. Their eyes met through the fence, and for a moment, neither moved. Then Emma deliberately turned her back. The gesture hit harder than any words could have. Back home, Michael pulled out the photo album from his college years, studying Julia's face in the old photographs. How had he been so blind? So wrapped up in his own ambitions that he'd missed the signs? Sunday evening, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Emma. Sister Margaret is helping me write this. I have questions about my mom. Real ones. Not made up stories to make me feel better. If you can tell me the truth, I'll meet with you and Dr. Chun tomorrow. Michael's hand shook as he replied, I promise to tell you everything I know. No more secrets. The next day, he arrived early at Dr. Chun's office, carrying a small box of memorabilia from his time with Julia. Emma arrived with grace, her face a careful mask of indifference that broke his heart. Doctor. Chen's office was designed to feel informal. Comfortable chairs arranged in a loose circle, warm lighting, abstract art on the walls. Emma chose the seat farthest from Michael. Before we begin, Doctor, Chen said, let's establish some ground rules. Emma, you can ask any questions you want. Michael, you'll answer honestly, even if the truth is difficult. Either of you can take a break if you need one. Agreed? They both nodded. Emma's first question came like a thunderbolt. Did you love her? Michael took a deep breath. Yes, I did. Not in the way I later loved Sarah, but Julia was special. She saw the world differently than anyone I'd ever met. She taught me to appreciate poetry and challenged my view of success. And why didn't you look for her when she left? Because I was young and stupid, he admitted. I was focused on building my company, on becoming successful. When she tried to contact me, I kept putting off returning her calls, thinking there would always be time later. It's my biggest regret. Emma's hands twisted in her lap. She died when I was 4. I don't remember her at all. Michael opened the box he'd brought, pulling out a small stack of letters. These are from Julia, from that summer. She wrote about her dreams, her fears. Would you like to read them? Emma's mask cracked slightly. She reached for the letters, then pulled back. Not today, but maybe you could tell me about her? What made her laugh? For the next hour, Michael shared stories about Julia, her passion for classic literature, her habit of singing off-key while cooking, her dream of writing children's books. With each story, Emma's rigid posture softened slightly. She sounds like she would have been a good mom, Emma said finally, her voice barely audible. She would have been amazing, Michael agreed, fighting back tears. Emma, I know I can't make up for the past 13 years, but if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your future. Emma looked at Dr. Chun, then back at Michael. I'm still angry, she said, and I don't trust you yet. That's fair, but she hesitated. Maybe we could start with more stories about my mom? Just that for now? It was a tiny opening, but it was something. Michael nodded, relief washing over him. Whatever you want, Emma. We'll go at your pace. As they left Dr. Chen's office, Emma paused in the doorway. I finished The Secret Garden again, she said. It was my mom's favorite book, wasn't it? How did you know? The copy at St. Mary's. I found her name written inside the cover. She donated it to the library there before she died. Michael watched her walk away with grace, his heart both heavy and hopeful. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a beginning. As autumn painted Manhattan in shades of gold and crimson, Michael and Emma settled into a careful routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, they met at Dr. Chun's office, sharing stories about Julia and gradually building a fragile bridge between past and present. During one such session, Emma brought a worn leather journal she'd found among St. Mary's records. It was my mom's, she explained, her fingers tracing the cover. She left it when she donated the books. I've been afraid to read it alone. Michael felt the weight of her trust in that moment. Together, they opened the journal, and Julia's elegant handwriting spilled across the pages. The entries dated back to her pregnancy, each one a letter to her unborn child. My dearest baby, one entry began, today I felt you move for the first time. I wish I could share this moment with your father. Michael would love you so much if he knew about you. Sometimes I imagine telling him, watching his face light up with joy. But his company is taking off, and I can't bear to complicate his life right now. Maybe someday? Emma's hands trembled as she read. She was protecting you, she said, her voice a mix of accusation and understanding. No, Michael corrected gently. She was protecting you. I was too driven, too focused on success. She must have seen that. As they continued reading, a more complete picture of Julia emerged. She'd moved to Connecticut, found work as a librarian, and built a quiet life for herself and Emma. The last entry was dated just before her cancer diagnosis. I hope whoever finds this journal will share it with my daughter when she's ready, Julia had written. Emma, my sweet girl, know that every choice I made was out of love. Your father isn't perfect, but he has a good heart. Don't let my decisions keep you from finding him someday. The discovery of the journal shifted something in their relationship. Emma began asking more personal questions during their sessions, not just about Julia, but about Michael's life, his company, his marriage to Sarah. One particularly cold October afternoon, she surprised him by asking about the adoption papers. "Are you still?" She hesitated, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Do you still want to adopt me, even after everything?" "More than anything," Michael answered without hesitation. "But only if and when you're ready." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Sister Margaret says it's complicated because you're my biological father. There are different rules or something?" "Grace is helping navigate the legal aspects," Michael explained. "But Emma, regardless of what any paperwork says, you're my daughter. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to be comfortable with that." Their conversations began extending beyond Dr. Chun's office. Emma allowed Michael to attend her school science fair, where her project on genetic markers won first place. He noticed she'd included a section on inherited traits, including crescent-shaped birthmarks. But progress wasn't linear. Some days, Emma would withdraw completely, refusing to see him. Grace explained that she'd overheard other children discussing Michael's wealth and status, suggesting Emma was lucky to have found a rich father. "She threw away the new books you sent," Grace reported. "Said she doesn't want anyone thinking she's using you for money." The comment stung, but it also filled Michael with fierce pride. His daughter had Julia's integrity. Then came the day Emma discovered an old newspaper article about Harrison Tech's early days. The piece mentioned Michael's ruthless business tactics, including a hostile takeover that had cost hundreds of people their jobs. "Is this why my mom didn't tell you about me?" she demanded during their next session, throwing the article on Dr. Chun's coffee table. "Because you cared more about money than people?" "Mama," Dr. Chun interjected, but Michael held up his hand. "No, she deserves an answer." He met his daughter's angry gaze. "Yes, I was that person. Success was all that mattered to me then. Your mother saw that, and she made a choice to protect you from that version of me. And now?" Emma challenged. "Are you different now?" "I'm trying to be," he answered honestly. "Losing Sarah made me reevaluate everything. Finding you, it's given me a chance to become someone worthy of being your father." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Emma picked up the article again, studying it more carefully. "Mom wrote about change in her journal," she said slowly, "about how people can grow if you give them the chance." She looked up at Michael. I think maybe she'd want me to give you that chance." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something closer to understanding. As they left Dr. Chun's office that day, Emma paused. "I have a chess tournament next weekend," she said, trying to sound casual. "If you're not busy," Michael felt his heart swell. "I'll be there." The chess tournament was held in a crowded community center in Brooklyn, where the air hummed with nervous energy from dozens of competitive children and their anxious parents. Michael arrived early, taking a seat in the back row as Grace had suggested, trying to be present without overwhelming Emma. He watched as she set up her board, her movements precise and methodical. She wore the dark blue sweater Sarah had once bought for the children they hoped to adopt, found in a box Michael had donated to St. Mary's. The sight made his throat tight with emotion. Between matches, he observed her interactions with other children. Emma was neither withdrawn nor overly social. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that reminded him painfully of Julia. During particularly challenging games, she would absently touch her birthmark, a gesture he recognized from his own moments of deep concentration. "She's ranked third in her age group." Sister Margaret appeared beside him, offering coffee from a paper cup. Chess was something she shared with Julia, apparently. "There are tournament records from Connecticut." Michael accepted the coffee gratefully. "I didn't know Julia played. There's still so much to learn about each other," Sister Margaret said gently. "That's not necessarily a bad thing." As the final round approached, Emma unexpectedly made her way to where Michael sat. "My opponent uses the Sicilian defense," she said matter-of-factly. "Mom's journal mentioned you were good at countering it. In college." Michael nodded, surprised she'd remembered that detail from their conversations. "Would you like some advice?" Emma sat beside him, leaving a careful space between them. For the next few minutes, they discussed strategy, her questions precise and thoughtful. As she stood to return to her board, she hesitated. "Thanks," she said quietly, "for coming today." The final match was intense. Emma's opponent, A serious-faced boy, 2 years her senior, played aggressively. Michael watched as she implemented their discussed strategy, her face a mask of concentration. When she finally called checkmate, her smile was brilliant but brief. Julia's smile, there and gone like summer lightning. The award ceremony was modest. Certificates, small trophies, a few proud photos. Emma accepted her second-place trophy with grace, but Michael could see the disappointment in her shoulders. "Would you," he started as she gathered her things, "would you like to get some ice cream to celebrate?" Emma glanced at Sister Margaret, who nodded encouraging. "Okay," she agreed, "but not anywhere fancy." They ended up at a small ice cream shop near St. Mary's. Emma with mint chocolate chip, Michael with vanilla. The conversation was stilted at first, but gradually eased as they discussed the tournament. "Mom taught me chess when I was 3, Emma said suddenly, studying her ice cream. "At least, that's what her journal says. The doctors let her play with me in the hospital, even near the end." Michael set his spoon down carefully. These moments when Emma shared memories, or the lack thereof, of Julia were always delicate. "I found something yesterday," he said. "Photos from a chess tournament Julia won in college. Would you like to see them?" Emma nodded, and Michael retrieved a small envelope from his coat. The photo showed a younger Julia, dark hair pulled back, concentrating over a chessboard. In one, she was laughing, caught off guard by the camera. "You have her smile," Michael said softly, "and her way of thinking 10 moves ahead." Emma traced her mother's face in the photo. Did she really write children's books? She wanted to. She had notebooks full of stories. Michael paused. "Actually, Grace helped me track down some of her old manuscripts. They're in storage in Connecticut. If you'd like, we could—" "Not yet," Emma interrupted, but gently. Maybe later." They finished their ice cream in companionable silence. As they walked back to St. Mary's, Emma spoke again. "I've been thinking about the adoption," she said, keeping her eyes forward. "Dr. Chun says it's okay to be scared about changes, even good ones." Michael waited, letting her find her words. "I don't want to leave St. Mary's yet," she continued. "It's been my home, but maybe we could start with weekends? Sometimes?" Michael felt his heart skip. "We could do that. Whatever pace you're comfortable with." At the steps of St. Mary's, Emma turned to face him. "I'm not ready to call you Dad," she said firmly. "I don't know when I will be. I understand." But she pulled something from her backpack, the chess set she'd used in the tournament. "Maybe you could teach me more about countering the Sicilian defense for next time?" Michael recognized the olive branch for what it was. "I'd like that very much." As he watched her climb the steps, clutching her trophy and photos, he realized that perhaps this was what Julia had hoped for all along. Not a perfect reunion, but a chance for father and daughter to find their way to each other, one careful move at a time. The turning point came unexpectedly on a rainy November morning. Michael was in his office reviewing quarterly reports when Grace burst in, her normally composed demeanor shattered. "There's been an incident at St. Mary's," she said, her voice tight. "Emma's missing. Single quotes." The world seemed to tilt. "Missing? What happened?" "Allow your king to the home," Grace explained as they rushed to the elevator. He had documents, apparently. Someone claiming to be Emma's maternal grandmother is seeking custody. Michael felt the blood drain from his face. Julia's mother? But Julia's records show both her parents were deceased. The woman has documentation suggesting otherwise. Emma overheard the conversation, and she ran. The drive to Brooklyn was tense. Sister Margaret met them at the entrance, her face drawn with worry. "We've searched her usual places," she reported. "The library, the chess park, nothing. But her journal and backpack are gone, along with some clothes." Michael's mind raced. Where would she go? What would Julia do? The answer hit him suddenly. "Connecticut," he said. "She's trying to find her mother's old home." Grace was already on her phone, coordinating with local authorities. Michael turned to Sister Margaret. "The manuscripts in storage. Emma asked about them last week. She wanted the address, but wouldn't tell me why. I'll have staff check the bus stations," Grace said. But in this weather, as if on cue, thunder rolled overhead. Michael grabbed his keys. "I think I know where she's headed. Grace, send me the storage facility address." Sister Margaret Please handle things here with the lawyer. I need to find my daughter." The drive to Connecticut was nerve-wracking. Rain lashed the windshield as Michael pushed through traffic, his mind filled with terrible possibilities. He'd just found her. He couldn't lose her now. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Surveillance cameras had caught Emma boarding a bus to Hartford 3 hours ago. She had a head start, but he knew where she was going. The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, a maze of identical metal units. The manager confirmed that a young girl had been asking about Julia Parker's unit earlier. She had documents, the manager said she was the daughter. "Policy is we don't let minors in alone," so she left. Seemed pretty upset. Which way did she go? The manager pointed toward a wooded area behind the facility. "There's an old library that way." She was asking about it. Michael's heart clenched. Of course, Julia's old workplace. He drove slowly along the rain-slicked roads, scanning the sidewalks. Finally, through the downpour, he spotted a familiar figure huddled under the awning of a closed library branch. Emma was soaked, her backpack clutched to her chest. She looked up as his car approached, but didn't run. Michael parked and stepped out into the rain, approaching slowly. "Everyone's worried about you." "She lied," Emma said, her voice breaking. "That woman, she says she's my grandmother, but Mom's journal said her parents were dead. She wrote about being alone, about having no one to help her when she was sick. Why would she lie about that?" Michael sat beside her on the wet steps, ignoring the rain. Sometimes people have complicated reasons for the stories they tell, but running away isn't the answer. "I thought," Emma wiped her eyes, "I thought if I could find Mom's things, her manuscripts, maybe there'd be answers. About her, about that woman, about everything. We can find those answers together," Michael said gently. "But you have to trust me, Emma. You have to let me help." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw Julia in her eyes. The same determination, the same fierce intelligence. "Do you promise?" she asked. "No more secrets?" "No more secrets," he agreed. "Whatever we find out about your grandmother, about Julia's past, we'll face it together. You're not alone anymore, Emma." She nodded slowly, then did something she'd never done before. She leaned against his shoulder. Michael carefully put his arm around her, and they sat there in the rain, father and daughter, both searching for pieces of the woman who had connected their lives. "I was scared," Emma admitted quietly, "that if that woman is really my grandmother, she'd take me away, that everything would change again." "Listen to me," Michael said firmly. "You're my daughter. Nothing and no one can change that. Whatever claims this woman makes, we'll handle it legally, properly. I'm not losing you again." For the first time, Emma didn't flinch at being called his daughter. Instead, she gripped his hand tightly. "Can we go home now?" The word home hung between them, heavy with meaning. "Yes," Michael said. "Let's go home." The following days unfolded in a whirlwind of legal meetings and emotional revelations. The woman claiming to be Emma's grandmother, Eleanor Parker, had arrived with a stack of documented evidence, birth certificates, photographs, and letters that seemed to tell a very different story than the one in Julia's journal. Michael sat with Emma in Dr. Chun's office as Grace presented their initial findings. Julia's journal entries about her parents being deceased were accurate. At the time, Grace explained gently, Eleanor Parker was declared legally dead after disappearing in 1989. She had been in a cult compound in New Mexico, cut off from the outside world. She only recently managed to leave and discover what happened to her daughter. Emma gripped the arms of her chair. "So she's really my grandmother? But why didn't Mom try to find her?" According to Eleanor's statement, she tried to contact Julia multiple times after escaping the compound, Grace continued. But by then, Julia was already sick. The letters were returned unopened. Michael watched his daughter process this information, seeing the wheels turn behind her eyes. Julia's eyes. "What does this mean for the adoption?" she asked finally. "Eleanor has legal standing to petition for custody," Grace admitted. "But," she added quickly, seeing Emma's face pale, "Michael has both biological rights and a strong case for adoption. The courts will consider what's best for you, Emma. Your choice matters here. Can I..." Emma hesitated. "Can I meet her first, before anything else happens?" The meeting was arranged for the following day at St. Mary's. with Dr. Chum present to mediate. Eleanor Parker proved to be a small, weathered woman with Julia's dark hair streaked with gray. When she saw Emma, she began to cry. "You look so much like her," Eleanor whispered. "Like my Julia." Emma stayed close to Michael, her hand finding his instinctively. The gesture wasn't lost on Eleanor, whose eyes tracked the movement with a complex mixture of emotions. "I know this is overwhelming," Eleanor said, composing herself. "I'm not here to disrupt your life, Emma. I lost so many years with Julia. I don't want to lose the chance to know my granddaughter too." Over the next few hours, Eleanor shared her story. Photos of Julia as a child, stories of her early love for writing, explanations of how she'd been drawn into the cult, seeking spiritual answers after her husband's death. Emma listened intently, occasionally squeezing Michael's hand when something particularly emotional was revealed. "Your mother was so strong," Eleanor said. "She built a life for herself, for you, despite everything. I wish I had been brave enough to leave sooner, to be there for her when she was sick. She wrote stories," Emma said suddenly. "Children's books. Did you know?" Eleanor's face lit up. She always wanted to be a writer. Even as a little girl, she was always making up stories. "Mr. Harrison, my dad," Emma corrected herself, causing Michael's heart to skip. "He found her manuscripts. We haven't read them yet. Perhaps," Michael suggested carefully, "we could all read them together? There might be room for everyone in your life, Emma. It doesn't have to be one or the other." The suggestion hung in the air. Eleanor was the first to respond. "I'm not looking to take Emma away," she said firmly. "I've seen how she looks at you, Mr. Harrison. I know that look. It's how Julia used to look at her father. I just want to be part of her life, if she'll let me." Emma looked between them. Her father, who had found her against all odds, and her grandmother, who had fought her way back from a lost life to connect with her only grandchild. Then, with wisdom beyond her years, she made a decision. "Maybe," she said slowly, "we could start with the manuscripts, all of us together, and then maybe weekend visits with both of you." Michael and Eleanor exchanged glances, seeing in each other the shared love for this remarkable girl who had brought them together. "Whatever you want, sweetheart," Eleanor agreed, as Michael nodded. Later that evening, as Michael drove Emma back to St. Mary's, she was unusually quiet. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I think Mom would like this," she said finally. "All of us together, I mean." Her journal, she always wrote about wanting family, about hoping everyone could heal someday. Michael thought about her capacity for love and forgiveness that lived on in their daughter. "I think you're right," he said softly. At St. Mary's, Emma paused before getting out of the car. "Dad," she said, testing the word carefully. "Thank you for finding me." Both times, Michael watched her walk inside, his vision blurring with tears. Sometimes, he realized, families weren't built in the way you expected. Sometimes they were pieced together through loss and discovery, through pain and healing, through the kind of love that transcended time and distance and mistake. The reading of Julia's manuscripts became a weekly ritual, bringing together their unconventional family in ways none of them had expected. They gathered in Michael's penthouse library, which he had redesigned with Emma in mind, complete with a chess table by the window and shelves of classic literature. Eleanor brought Julia's favorite cookies, made from an old family recipe. Emma curled up in an oversized armchair, while Michael and Eleanor took turns reading aloud from the carefully preserved pages of Julia's stories. The manuscripts revealed a side of Julia they hadn't known: her imagination, her humor, her deep understanding of children's hearts. She had written tales of lost children finding their way home, of magical birthmarks that connected separated families, of second chances and unexpected joy. "She was writing about you," Eleanor said one evening, as they finished a story about a young girl who could see the future in the stars. "All these stories, they were messages for you, Emma." Emma traced the familiar handwriting on the page. "She knew I'd find them someday," she said softly. "She knew I'd find all of you." The adoption proceedings moved forward, with Eleanor's full support. She had relocated to New York, renting a small apartment nearby, and was becoming a regular presence in Emma's life. The three of them formed an unlikely support system, each bringing different pieces of Julia's memory into focus. One Saturday morning, as Michael and Emma were playing chess, she broached the subject they'd all been dancing around. "I want to move in," she said, moving her knight with precise determination. "Before Christmas. If that's okay." Michael carefully set down the pawn he'd been about to move. "Are you sure you're ready?" Emma nodded, her expression serious. "Sister Margaret says sometimes we hold on to safe places because we're afraid of losing them. But I'm not afraid anymore." She looked up at him. "You'll let me visit St. Mary's though, right? And help with their chess club?" "Of course," Michael smiled. "We can volunteer there together. And Eleanor can come over for dinner whenever you want. Every Sunday," Emma decided. Like a real family. The word family no longer carried the weight of loss it once had. Instead, it felt like possibility, like hope. The process of moving Emma's belongings was both simpler and more complex than expected. She had few material possessions, but each item carried emotional significance. Her chess set, Julia's journal, the dog-eared copy of The Secret Garden, photographs Eleanor had provided of Julia as a child. Michael had converted his home office into a bedroom for her, but let Emma choose everything else. From the color of the walls, deep blue, like the night sky, to the arrangement of her books. Eleanor contributed family heirlooms, Julia's old jewelry box, handmade quilts, photographs that spanned generations. The night before Emma was set to move in permanently, Michael found her in what would be her new room, staring out the window at the city lights. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Just thinking about Mom, about how everything's connected. Her stories, my birthmark, you finding me at St. Mary's. It's like she planned it all somehow." Michael joined her at the window. "Julia always did think 10 moves ahead," he said, smiling at the chess reference. "Dad?" Emma turned to face him, her expression earnest. "I found something in one of her manuscripts. A letter addressed to you. I think you should read it." She retrieved a sealed envelope from her backpack, the paper yellowed with age. Michael recognized Julia's handwriting immediately. "To Michael, to be opened when you find her." With trembling hands, he broke the seal. "Dear Michael, if you're reading this, it means our daughter has found her way to you. I'm sorry I never told you about her. Fear, pride, and circumstances kept me silent when I should have spoken. But I knew, somehow, that you two would find each other when the time was right. Take care of our Emma. She has your determination and my love of stories. Teach her chess. You were always better at it than me. Let her know she was born from love, even if it was love that couldn't last. Most importantly, let her know that sometimes the best families are the ones we build ourselves. Piece by piece, choice by choice. All my love, Julia." When Michael looked up, his eyes wet, he found Emma watching him intently. Without words, she stepped forward and hugged him, their first real embrace. Over her head, he caught sight of their reflection in the window, father and daughter, both bearing the crescent birthmark, both finally where they were meant to be. That Christmas marked the beginning of their new life together, transforming Michael's once austere penthouse into a true home. Emma's presence filled the spaces that had been empty for so long, bringing with her a warmth that reminded Michael of both Julia's passion and Sarah's gentleness. The holiday preparations became a family affair, with Eleanor teaching Emma traditional Parker family recipes while Michael attempted to help, usually causing more chaos than assistance in the kitchen. They decorated the tree with a mixture of elegant ornaments from Michael's collection and handmade ones from Emma's years at St. Mary's. On Christmas Eve, they hosted a dinner that brought together all the threads of their unusual story. Sister Margaret and Grace joined them, along with Dr. Chun and several of Emma's friends from St. Mary's. The penthouse rang with laughter and conversation, the kind of joyful noise Michael had once thought he'd never hear again. "Mom would love this," Emma whispered to Michael as they watched Eleanor showing Sister Margaret old photographs. All of us together, making new stories. The success of Julia's manuscripts had been unexpected. With Emma's permission, Michael had shown them to a publishing house, and they had immediately recognized their potential. The first book was set to be published in the spring, with Emma and Eleanor collaborating on the illustrations. They had chosen to publish under Julia's name, with a dedication that read, "For Emma, who found her way home, and for all children searching for their own stories." As midnight approached and guests began to leave, Emma gathered everyone in the library for what had become their nightly tradition, reading from Julia's stories. She chose one they hadn't read before, a tale about a family of stars separated by cosmic storms, but finding their way back together. She always knew, Eleanor said softly as Emma read. Even then, Julia knew love would find a way. Later that night, after Eleanor had gone home and Emma had fallen asleep surrounded by her new books and chess trophies, Michael stood in his daughter's doorway, watching her peaceful face in the soft glow of her star-shaped night light. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, the chance visit to St. Mary's, the identical birthmarks, the hidden letters and manuscripts, the tears and truths that had paved the way to healing. He thought about Julia, whose love had been strong enough to reach across time and bring them together. In Emma's room, on her bulletin board, she had created what she called her constellation of family, photographs connected by golden threads. There was Julia in college, laughing over a chessboard, Eleanor in her younger days, holding baby Julia, Sarah on her wedding day with Michael, Sister Margaret and Grace at the chess tournament, and in the center, a recent photo of Emma between Michael and Eleanor, all three smiling, bound together by love and choice and forgiveness. Spring arrived with the publication of Julia's first book. At the launch event, Emma stood proudly between Michael and Eleanor as she read the opening pages to a room full of captivated children. The story, about a magical birthmark that helped a lost girl find her true family, held special meaning for those who knew the real tale behind it. "Do you think there are other stories out there?" Emma asked Michael that evening as they played chess in their favorite spot by the window. Other families waiting to find each other. Michael moved his knight, smiling at his daughter's philosophical question. "I think love has a way of writing stories we can't always predict," he said. "Your mother taught me that." Emma nodded, studying the board with the same intensity Julia once had. "I'm glad our story found its way to a happy ending," she said, moving her queen with decisive grace. "Checkmate, Dad," Michael laughed, tipping over his king in surrender. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one perhaps marking another story waiting to be told, another family waiting to be found. In his pocket, he carried Julia's last letter, its words now memorized but still powerful. "Sometimes the best families are the ones we build ourselves, piece by piece, choice by choice." Looking at Emma, her face glowing with victory and love, Michael knew that Julia had been right. Their family hadn't followed a traditional path, but it had found its way home nonetheless. Through loss and discovery, through pain and healing, through the kind of love that transcends time and distance, they had built something beautiful together. And somewhere, he was sure, Julia was smiling, knowing that her final story had turned out exactly as she'd hoped. Not an ending, really, but a new beginning, written in the stars and sealed with a crescent-shaped birthmark that had guided a father and daughter back to each other. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings!